All right, everybody. Looks to be that time of day, that time of the week. Hopefully, you all turned your clocks back and got an extra hour's sleep, which means you'll be extra sharp today. So, I'm just going to wait for you all to get on board, and then we'll get to this week's webinar. So, hopefully, you all got some good sleep. And I want to get to, hopefully, you can all hear me okay. Let me know that you can hear me just fine when you jump on board. Let me know you're out there. I'm a couple minutes early, but I got a lot to go through. So hopefully people grab on board real quick, and then we'll be able to get started with today's agenda. So I'm going to talk about what real research has to say about the type of training or what's involved in how to develop a better physique / figure. So we're going to get into that straight away as soon as we got some more people on board. I'm gonna use a really good recent study, and we're gonna get in there and get at it. So let me know you can hear me okay. I got some new audio options, and want to make sure that you can all hear me just fine. So let me know on that, and then I will get to the webinar. So loud and clear, good to know, good to know. So got a really good study today that I want to talk about in terms of clearing up the mythology that surrounds a lot of this industry, whether it's diet, whether it's training. But this one is all about what training is to get a better physique or figure, what's involved in that in real terms, and not the stuff you've been led to believe. And then we're going to get straight on into that as soon as we build a bit of an audience. And it's a long webinar on a recent study, so we're definitely going to get to that straight away. So I want to share that. So I'm going to be referring to this particular study here in the Journal of Applied Physiology from 2016. So you can see that's pretty recent. And that's the where you can find it. And very, very good, in-depth. One of the things I want to teach you as we do weekly webinars is how to read research. What's good research? What's bad research? What's equivocal research? What's unequivocal research? What kind of research matters and what kind of research doesn't? And all those kind of things. So hopefully people will find this interesting. And again, we're going to explode some of the myths out there that keep happening and keep being perpetrated by the industry with its agenda. And we're going to see what the real research has to say about a lot of this stuff. So really, really important stuff. Good. People are reading my books, and Kathy's just saying major rebound stage, totally bummed out about getting fat again. Well, Kathy, you have to keep in mind, you're programming your metabolism to do whatever it does. So if you're in a rebound mode, then that's because you programmed your body to do that through probably some kind of unwise or ill-fated diet regimen that you followed. And a rebound is a natural and very predictable result of that, which we can get into another time. So here's something that, I find this study about how to gain muscle development, sculpt a figure, those kind of things. So I just want to get right into it because it's a pretty in-depth study. So I'm going to get right into the P's and Q's of all that and get you guys involved. And then hopefully you can all see that. And then I'm going to bring it up as well and get going. All right. So, like I said, real research and what it has to say. What does the real research have to say is behind how to train for a better physique or figure? Let me blow that up so you can see that. So what does the real research say is behind how to train for a better physique or figure? And that's real important stuff. And we got to get on that because it's a lot different than what you probably think it is. So here is the name of the study right here. Neither load nor systemic hormones determine resistance training mediated hypertrophy or strength gains in resistance trained young men. So let me blow that up for you. Don't get intimidated by the title. I'm going to explain all that to you in terms of what it really means. So what this study actually showed was, a lot of the times you hear about this window of opportunity after training, and it's all about growth hormone optimization, and we got growth hormone boosters and testosterone boosters, and time your branched chain amino acids during your training. Well, the latter part of this research, neither load nor systemic hormones determine resistance training mediated hypertrophy, which means growth and development, or strength gains in resistance trained young men. So that means that all of that stuff about branch chains and growth hormone optimized, window of opportunity, they find no connection between that and developing a better physique, figure, and or strength. They also find that load is not the determining factor in terms of developing strength or a better physique. And this is something I've been saying for almost 30 years now, and usually attacked by all the industry myth chasers out there and Kool-Aid drinkers out there who don't want to understand real research, and they just want to follow the crowd. But as Warren Buffett said, if you just follow the herd, you spend a lot of time scraping your shoes. So here is where the actual study is. So I will just copy that for you. I don't think it'll paste. So when you're looking at this, maybe if Perry's on board, my go-to guy here, you can copy this actual link to the actual study and put it in the notes or the comments section so you can all see this and follow along later. Because I want you to note that I've deleted a lot of the real nerdy study design stuff and collection methods stuff below, so I could just stick to the heart of the matter, and I could just stick to the important stuff and the conclusions involved and why this is a good study. So again, what does the research say is truly behind developing a better body, male or female? And it's not load and it's not hormones. So let's get into it. Note below that what you're going to see in the notes, researcher notes are in black and bold, and my comments in this are in blue. So hopefully you can, if you can read along. Hopefully the script is big enough that you can read along. So we provide novel evidence of the effect of lifting markedly different lighter versus heavier loads, mass per repetition, during whole body resistance training on the development of muscle strength and hypertrophy in previous trained persons. This is important, and I'll explain that in a minute. Using a large sample size, which is also important, contradicting dogma. This is their words, and contradicting dogma. We report that the relative load lifted per repetition does not determine skeletal muscle hypertrophy, which for layman means development, or for the most part, strength development. In line with our previous work, acute post-exercise systemic hormonal changes were unrelated to strength and hypertrophic gains. What this, this speaks to, like I said earlier, all the nonsense about selling you branched chain amino acids, your post-workout whey powder, your GH boosters, and your testosterone boosters. This is what the real research has to say. Now, what's important in real research? The development of muscle strength and hypertrophy in previously trained persons. Now, the reason this is important is anyone who's done research in this area, when you usually do these studies, they're very short term, and they're with college kids, students who want to make a little bit of money, so they sign up for studies, but they're previously untrained. So the adaptive response, you are likely to introduce anything and get a response, and then give credit where credit's not really due, because you're training untrained people, and then you're training them, something's going to happen. So this is important development here, that the people they use are previously trained people. So that's very, very important as well. So just a little point here, resistance training is a potent stimulus for increasing skeletal muscle mass and strength, of course. However, the exact resistance training variables that determine skeletal muscle development and strength remain a topic of continued investigation. And then next, they discuss usual industry mythology and dogma, Current recommendations are that resistance training with relatively heavy, 70 to 85% one repetition maximum loads, is a prerequisite for maximizing resistance training induced muscle development. I'll just use the word muscle development in substitution for hypertrophy in case that's a little too academic for people. It has even been suggested on the basis of only acute electromyography data, the greater motor unit recruitment occurs when lifting heavier loads, even if heavier and lighter loads are performed to volitional failure. In other words, this is the dogma of train for strength and development will come. However, and this is important, this conclusion is at odds with the existing data from long-term studies. Boy, I've been waiting to say that for 20 years, and I did say it in my book, The Abel Approach, 2nd edition. So this conclusion is at odds with the existing data determined from long-term training studies. In other words, the standard, decades-old dogma of train for strength and development will come is a myth, all right? And we're going to get into that. So in spite of the research that proves this dogma wrong, it remains strong. Why? Because you can use it to sell supplements. So we reported that load from as low as 30% and up to 90%, 1RM, played a minimal role in stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Similar loading strategies also did not affect hypertrophy in a small sample of trained or untrained men following resistance training when participants performed the resistance training of volitional failure. And that term volitional failure becomes important as well. So in addition, and in contrast to what others have proposed, we have also demonstrated that resistance exercise-induced increases in circulating hormones play little role in regulating muscle protein synthesis after an acute bout of resistance training or skeletal muscle development following resistance training. I'm going to blow that up for you there. So this goes against all the supplement hype that want to use short-term studies of untrained people and take things out of context. So look at that. In contrast to what others have proposed, and they use some research there, they've demonstrated resistance-induced increases in circulating hormones after a workout. A lot of people who sell you supplements are going to say, look at all these different changes in hormones after workout. That's why you need, our magic potions. But what they're saying is, yes, there's resistance exercise-induced increases in circulating hormones, but these play a very little role in regulating muscle protein synthesis after an acute bout of resistance exercise or skeletal muscle hypertrophy following resistance training. And all that goes against supplement hype. So you see where this is going, and this is one of the better studies I read. So in terms of qualitative analysis, taken together, our data suggests that factors regulating skeletal muscle development in response to resistance training include neither load nor systemic hormonal concentrations. Now, if you go to this actual piece of research in the comments section, someone will post that. And if you go to the research, here are all the documents that they've used to reference this. So factors regulating skeletal muscle hypertrophy, in other words, muscle development in response to resistance training, all right, the factors involved are not load and not systemic hormonal concentrations. Very, 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 very important because it goes against what's being sold to you decade after decade in this industry. I get frustrated myself as a physique transformation expert that there's far too many on these popular websites, strength experts telling people how to develop their physiques when these strength experts are expert in strength. They're not experts in physique development. So what their conclusion means, what this means in layman terms that you need to understand is that train for strength and development will come is a myth. And I've been saying that for decades. And my innovation training research has a lot of backed up documents. And that's in my book, The Abel Approach, that you can see behind me, 2nd edition. And all these testosterone boosters, GH boosters, etc., they're bunk. All right. Nutrient timing around your workout, the window of opportunity, that is also bunk. That only applies for endurance training, not for short-term training for muscle development and or figure development. So While there is growing evidence that neither load nor acute post-exercises increases in circulating hormones affect resistance training, induce skeletal muscle development, it's important to acknowledge that many of these aforementioned studies were conducted in healthy but untrained participants. And then they reference some of the data there that supplement companies use to hype their useless products. Because you use untrained participants, here's how they explain it. Given that resistance trained individuals exhibit an attenuated muscle protein synthesis response to resistance exercise, they are likely less adaptable to muscle protein synthetic response to resistance exercise. They are less adaptable than untrained persons in terms of phenotypic adaptations of skeletal muscle in response to resistance training. Now, what that means is this particular study used previously trained people because they know that if they use untrained people, they're going to get a skewed results because the adaptive response is heightened in an untrained individual. This is important when conducting studies in terms of adaptability, all right? So the longer you train, the less adaptable you become to stimulus is what they're saying here. And that becomes an important factor because a lot of people make gains by doing things at the beginning that are never going to work long term. So very, very important, and why this research is so well done and so well performed, because they understand these details and they take them to heart. Now, the primary aim of this study, and remember, this is the Journal of Physiology Research. This is pretty good stuff here. Primary aim of this study was to determine the effects of a 12-week high repetition, lower load versus lower repetition, higher load resistance training intervention on skeletal muscle hypertrophy and strength development in resistance trained young men. The secondary aim, here we go again, I just want to make this real clear for people. The secondary aim was to examine whether the acute post-exercise increase in systemic hormones was correlated with changes in skeletal muscle mass or strength. And the hypothesis, their hypothesis here, highlight that for you as well. Our hypothesis is that neither load nor the acute post-exercise increase in systemic hormones would determine resistance training-induced adaptive response. And that bears repeating. Our hypothesis, neither load nor the acute post-exercise increase in systemic hormones is going to determine resistance training-induced adaptations. Now, why is that important? It's important because, again, the supplement industry likes to use the rabbit in the hat sleight of hand technique to show you that because there is acute post-exercises increases in systemic hormones, therefore supplement X, supplement Y, or supplement Z is needed added to your protocol to mediate this increase in systemic hormones. What they're saying is there's an increase in acute post-exercise increase in systemic hormones, but they have nothing to do with developing your physique. And that is super duper important. So, Perry, if you can just go back to the beginning and maybe post the link to the study, I will, where is it here? There it is there. So if you can just paste that in there, because I can't use that. So there's the link of the study. Again, the Journal of Applied Physiology from July 2016. Really, really, really important stuff. Get down to the methods and the participants. I'm going to leave this here. You can look at it in the notes or look at it yourself. I'm not going to read through all this because it'll put you all to sleep. I want to get to the important points. I'll do all the grunt work of the academic stuff, folks. You're going to have to trust me to take out what is and isn't important in those terms of what you need to know and what I can leave out, because otherwise this would go on for hours, because this study was quite in depth. So they talk a bit about the experimental design. Participants randomly allocated to one of two possible conditions, high rep or low rep for the training program. They explain what that entails. The low rep group performed 3 sets, 8 to 12, corresponded to 70 to 90% 1RM. Performed both groups performing to volitional failure. Now, this volitional failure detail in the study design also caught my eye. This is also really, really important because volitional failure is about specific level of applied intensity. So intensity, something I say in my book, The Abel Approach, over and over, intensity is more important than load. That's something I've been saying for decades, and something people have slammed me for saying for decades, because they only understand tissue intensity, and I'm talking about neuromuscular intensity of effort, what is known as MVNA, maximum voluntary neural activation, which you don't hear a lot of discussion about from the strength experts who tell you how to develop a better body. And my right-hand man here, Perry, has actually posted the link to the study. If you're listening to this on a podcast, I'm sure it's in the notes as well. So if you want to look at all this. But given that the low repetition and high repetition groups both went to volitional failure, that's the common denominator here, and that'll become important as I go through the study and explain everything to you. So what we see here, again, is that intensity is more important than load. So you really want to get that through your head, all right? So the acute protocol, how it was followed: a bout of resistance exercise performed consisted of supersets, including, and it tells you the exercises there, the amount of rest time, and each exercise performed until volitional failure. There it is again, okay? Each exercise in their respective rep range. So that is the highlight for me, all right? Performed until volitional failure in their respective rep range groups. And that's important because basically it says that there was an equally applied amount of effort in both groups. Too often, folks, another thing you need to take away from this is a lot of the times when I'm trying to explain this in workshops and seminars, people confuse it in their brains as the difference between training light and training heavy. And I've always said, there's no such thing. Heavy isn't how much is on the bar. Heavy is how much stress a muscle is under. So the volitional failure thing means that whether they were doing high reps or low reps, they were applying a lot of intensity until the muscles would fail. That doesn't mean when you go through and read this at the end, that doesn't mean you can conclude, oh, I can train really light and not break a sweat, and I can use 15-pound dumbbells where I used to use 45-pound dumbbells. That's not what this is saying. So I need to point that out because people like to interpret things the way they want to rather than the way they are. And that's a very, very important thing as well. So following the bout of resistance exercise, participant was given, here's your whey protein again, mixed with water, and then blood samples were collected at 15, 30, and 60-minute intervals following the consumption of the protein beverage. So really, really important stuff there, because this is going to be the measuring of the hormones that they talk about, to look at if that has any difference in terms of developing response. Cheryl's just saying, thank you for explaining that. I was confused. A lot of people get confused by that, Cheryl. I mean, that you get so inundated from the minute you come into this industry, you get inundated with, should I train heavy? And then people translate that into heavy being how much weight is on the bar. Whereas, like I said, heavy has to do with how much stress a muscle is under tissue-wise, and you can do that with high reps, low reps, or incredibly high reps. Anyone who's ever done my quad blast for legs, that's just body weight, and yet you will reach absolute failure on that more than you can with lifting any kind of weight on a leg press or squat. So that's really important as well. So what I'm really glad to say right now, folks, is that our numbers are building. I thought with something as dry academically as this study was, I would lose people, but more people are tuning in, which is another testament to that I gather a really smart crowd, and I'm pretty happy about that and pretty proud of that. So I don't get a whole lot of numbers, but I get smart people, so that's important. So Doug's just asking, is it safe to assume these applications be found in Scott's programs? I'm going to get to that, Doug. If you just hang in there, I'm laying the foundation here. So then they talk about the resistance training intervention full body resistance training done 4 days a week. Okay, so that's pretty systemically important as well for a study. Each day included 5 exercises consisting of 2 separate supersets and 1 additional exercise. These things are all important because it speaks to a requisite level of volume that a lot of other studies don't. So this is, again, I'm trying to teach you also what's a good study from a bad study. One of the things I wish was different here was the timed rest interval, because when you time rest intervals, you don't account for each individual's work capacity. If they allowed individuals to do a subjective rest period where they didn't do their next set until they knew they were subjectively able to do the next set with equal or greater intensity, that would have been a better response as far as I'm concerned, but that's okay. And then each workout repeated twice per week. And for the purposes of study, that makes sense. So this is where I have a little bit of problem with the rest intervals. Loads were decreased between sets to ensure that repetitions performed within the participants' assigned rep range. So in other words, they want to stay true to the design frame of high repetitions versus low repetitions. And because they were timing the intervals, a lot of the times they would have to decrease the load so that the study subject could still get the repetition range that they were supposed to get. So each individual was also supervised by a trainer for each session to ensure the set was performed to volitional failure and correct technique. That is hugely important in a study of this kind because you have an objective observer. You're not relying on the subjective account of something, which can really skew results. A lot of the time, some of these studies with untrained people in diet or workouts, you're relying on self-reporting, and that is a terrible way to go about things. So that's another requisite important element of this study design. So participants' load was increased with subsequent training sessions when they could perform more repetitions than their designated repetition range. In other words, they kept training to volitional failure, and if their work capacity increased and their strength increased, all that means is they added the load accordingly. So that's really important stuff too. And then they tested their strength in real terms to see what the results were between high reps and low reps training. So they actually recorded muscle fiber type and cross-sectional area. Muscle biopsies were then obtained, body composition and muscle fiber cross-sectional area. You can read through these yourself. Strength changes in the high repetition, low repetition groups. Let me just see. I appreciate that, Jenny. Appreciate the comment. So they're just talking about the repetition ranges, high reps and low reps, which means low loads and high loads. So resistance training volume was controlled, hormonal concentrations and correlations, and then I'll get to the discussion because I want to skip all that stuff and get to the meat and potatoes. If you're a study design freak, then you can, we've left you we've left you the link to the study and you can go through the other, 10 or 15 pages that are left out. So here's the discussion. 12 weeks of supervised higher and lower load per repetition resistance training programs are similarly effective at inducing skeletal muscle hypertrophy in resistance trained participants when resistance training was performed of volitional failure. So again, the important element here is exertion, intensity of effort, not load, maximum voluntary neural activation. So just before I forget, since I didn't add this to my notes, what I want to say here is one of the reasons this is important when I get to the conclusion is if you're continually trying to train heavy, as in equating heavy with how much weight is on the bar, then you're inviting unnecessarily joint strain, which is going to come back and bite you on the ass months or years down the road. So that's really important stuff. If you can train with moderate weights and more reps, then you decrease the stress on the joints month in, month out, year in, year out. You're probably going to last longer in terms of training. And that's something I wish I knew in my younger training days. So that's an important element to consider here as well. So additionally, when participants were tested for maximal strength, the increases in muscular strength were not significantly different between the two groups. So lower weights, moderate weights, higher repetitions versus heavy load, I'm a macho man, how much can you bench? The increases in muscular strength, not significantly different between the two groups. Booyah. Something I said in my Abel Approach book over and over and over again that continues to fall on deaf ears because of the macho bullshit that goes on in this industry, where it's all about how much can you bench, how much can you squat, train for strength and development will come. And I've explained over and over again how that is not true, and I've used the requisite research to do it. The ironic thing here, folks, is that this research came out in 2016, and yet I've been arguing about moderate weights and higher reps being the way to the basic foundation for building a better physique, male or female. I've been saying that for 30 years now, and have been attacked for saying it. And now here's this research here. So, and I use research as well, which we will get to. So the exception, which I have to point out, because this is important too, got to cover all the realms. Now, the exception they noted in recording strength increases was 1 repetition max in the bench press, which increased to a greater extent in the lower repetition group. Now, this makes sense in terms of central nervous system demands and neuromuscular response to specificity of training and technique, but not for hypertrophy. What does that mean? It means the number one principle of exercise physiology is overload. The number 2 principle of exercise physiology is the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands, which means if you want to increase your bench, then low reps and high loads make for your training foundation, because you're training for a whole different reason and your body will adopt in a whole different way. So that speaks to the specificity of training, but not to muscle development. All right. So that's an important thing. People keep lumping the two together, right? But if that was true, then like I said, the best bodybuilders would be the best powerlifters, and we know that's just not true. If you go to a powerlifting competition that's natural and tested, you're not going to see a lot of super physiques there, trust me. So I'm going to get to your comments in a minute, but additionally, post-exercise levels of circulating hormones did not change as a result of the resistance training intervention and were unrelated to changes in muscle mass and strength. So what this shows goes against a massive amount of supplement industry bogus claims and suggestions, right? Like I said before, they take things out of context. They use certain realities and twist them in order to market to you supplements that really have no bearing on the stimulus response, adaptive response that you're looking for. So taken together with previous data, the findings of this present study, along with a recent meta-analysis, and folks, I'm always harping on you in my lectures about the importance of meta-analysis. If you're looking across time and across studies to see what the majority of studies and conclusions arrive at, that's always important in any well-designed study in diet or training. So taken together with previous data, the findings of this study and other studies and meta-analysis do not support the assertion that higher load resistance training is a prerequisite to maximize resistance training-induced muscle hypertrophy, especially when lower load exercises are performed to volitional failure. So this is what we're saying again about proving it's not train for strength and development will come, it's train for development and strength will come. And that's what I say in my book, The Abel Approach, which I'll just post that up here. The Abel Approach, 2nd edition, really, really important. I got a ton of research in there as well. But here, that goes to the explanation that someone was asking for clarity about before. So that word especially All right, especially when lower load exercises are performed to volitional failure. See the difference in former studies when they used high loads and low reps, strength, what we call the strength realm, repetition range, versus higher repetitions with moderate weights, is that they didn't control for training to failure. They didn't control for intensity of effort. And then that skewed the results towards saying that it was all about higher weights with lower loads, because they weren't controlling for how hard someone was actually working out. And that is a very, very important thing. So intensity of effort is more important than load when it comes to muscle development. And that phrase, folks, you'll see throughout my book. Intensity of effort is more important than load when it comes to muscle development. And I talk about, if you go to articles that I've had posted on certain websites, I talk about intensity of effort. Guys that I watch with incredible muscle development doing, sets of 50 and 100 on leg press, or doing a quad blast, or Tom Platz squatting for 10 minutes without stopping and not counting his reps, that kind of stuff. When I talked about Fred Hatfield versus Tom Platz squatting at FIBO one year, where Tom Platz squatted 500 pounds for 24 reps, and Fred Hatfield was the first man to squat 1,000 pounds one time. Yet which one had the leg development? It was Tom Platz and not Fred Hatfield. So all these things are coming to bear here in this particular study, and that's why it's important. So low repetition versus high repetition at volitional failure, the size principle would dictate larger motor units have been recruited in an attempt to sustain the required force. That's something I've been also arguing for a long time. I was one of the first to talk about the size principle, and I will get there. When I get to the research at the end. But I did a whole thing on the size principle on various articles, and I'm sure someone can find them and post them here. So Doug's just saying at 52, his body is definitely feeling the effect of load training. I hear you, Doug. Physique after 50 is all about how we should be modifying our training after age 50. So, in terms, and this study kind of points that out. So we'll get there. But again, intensity is the more important factor than is low rep, high load. So, how often have I said tongue in cheek, leave your ego at the door at the gym. It's not how much you lift, it's about how you're lifting it. And there's a science involved in that a lot of people don't understand and don't know how to face. And they think that heavy loads means harder workouts. And those are people who have never worked out with me, I can tell you that. So that's very, very important stuff. So then they go on to say there have been recent claims about higher versus lower load and motor unit drive. And then here is what they say. And they quote a study there. Such a premise is fundamentally incorrect, as has been pointed out. And they use the research for 45 and 46. And again, the current data, along with previous work, all right, are direct proof that hypertrophy and strength gains are not a function of the load lifted. I'm going to isolate that for you and look at this, folks. This is real research here. So I'm just going to pause here and let you absorb this. Maybe you're hitting your share button. Share this with all the plate heads out there who want to go in and talk about how much their weight they're lifting, yada, yada, yada. The current data, along with previous work, and there's some work you can check out, are direct proof that hypertrophy, as in development, physique development, male or female, and strength gains are not a function of the load lifted. Whew. Boy, that's a volume of stuff right there. I mean, almost my whole book, The Abel Approach, is about that conclusion. And which started with me making those arguments 20 years before this study was even done. So now what they say instead, we propose that exercising until volitional failure with adequate volume and load, all right, now that requires the essence of program design, anywhere from 30% to 90% will sufficiently activate muscle motor units, and that drives skeletal muscle hypertrophy. Wow, is that ever important? So instead, all right, going against the dogma that you've been force fed and had to swallow and choke on for decades, and I say that with all due disdain because I've been hearing it since the 70s and I'm sick of it. And these people will only chase research that supports their view. So what they're saying is instead, we propose exercising until volitional failure. All that means is high intensity, folks. In terms of design and study, yes, these subjects had to go to volitional failure. It's not really important to go to volitional failure in reality training, especially if you're doing some kind of compound training or complexes, but it's important that you're getting that kind of level of effort, what we call, again, in innervation training terms, maximum voluntary neural activation. So as you can see here, between 30%, 90% 1RM will sufficiently activate motor units, and that drives skeletal muscle development. And what it also does, which they're not studying here, is protect your joints from wear and tear, which, believe me, you'll wish you had back when you're my age. Now, here's the thing, 30% 1RM. I used to do in my workshops and stuff all the time, I would have 2 trainees, and would have one trainee work up to limit strength reps where they would do a max squat of, say, 3 reps. And then we would gauge how fatigued they were after that set. And they could still talk at at this kind of level of intensity, et cetera, et cetera. Then I would have another trainee warm up and do a max set until volitional failure in a squat of, say, 20, 25 reps, doing what's called an extended set, where they would catch their breath, do an extra rep, catch their breath, do an extra rep. And then we would see whose work capacity was the most challenged by doing that. And when I did that in real terms, in real workshops, it reinforced this notion that even 30% of what you could actually lift maximally one time will sufficiently activate the motor units, and I would argue better activate the motor units, and that drives skeletal muscle hypertrophy. So that's really, really important stuff. And then they talk about some problems with other studies that very, very important. Lower loads, higher loads, and you can see that they quote a lot of the studies there. I'm going to skip through that stuff. So their conclusion there, it remains apparent similar adaptations are a result of resistance exercise being performed until volitional failure. So again, what they're talking about over and over again and again, using lower loads or higher loads, intensity of effort is the common underlying factor and stimulus to adaptive response when it comes to muscle development. And that's for the ladies as well, in terms of developing a better figure. All right. And this means a mixture of repetition ranges. So following the 12-week intervention, there were similar increases in muscle strength between groups. So you can even gain strength with lighter loads, but high intensity. And that's another of my innervation training precepts about strength density and the different kinds of strength, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very important. So specifically, higher reps and low reps increase strength with no difference between the groups. Both, okay, high reps and low reps increase strength with no differences between the groups. So you can get strong by training for development. Like I said, the innervation training principle is train for development and strength will come, not the other way around. So you can increase strength while training for development, but the reverse is not necessarily true, except in that bench press 1RM, which makes sense if you're going to train for powerlifting or something like that. Then you want to stay in that low rep range because you're training for a very specific purpose. So it is evident that current literature supports the use of both low repetition, high load, and high repetition, low load. And there's some quotes there. Resistance training to induce maximal strength. Our results support the concept that maximal strength increases can be achieved with the use of either low or high loads, as long as there's periodic practice of lifting with heavier loads. So that's really, really important stuff there. Really, really important stuff. And I'm going to tell you about one of my programs that a lot of you are familiar with that actually talks about that very thing. So that's my hard gainer solution program that goes into, look at what they just said. Okay, I'm going to scroll up here. It's evident the current literature supports the use of both low repetition high load and high repetition low load resistance training to induce increases in maximal strength. Our results support the concept that maximal strength increases can be achieved with the use of either low or high loads, so long as there's periodic practice of lifting with heavier loads. All right, this is exactly, all right, how my hard gainer solution program is designed. And my hard gainer solution came out well before this study, way before this study. And yet this is exactly how my hard gainer solution program, and now of course the online course as well, is designed. And once again, what this shows is that experience is always going to be more right and research catches up later. So the lesson here for me in terms of being someone who's been in this for 4 decades is that this new trend, this new online trendy thing, that those who only know how to chase research are always going to be left behind, the true innovators. It's easy to just follow the trends. And the latest one is to pretend that you're well informed with research when you really don't know how to use research contextually. And experience should always come before research, always, if the person is smart and experienced. So hopefully that comes across loud and clear. So indeed, and again, don't forget, everything in black and bold is from the researchers. Everything in blue is from me. Indeed, strength is a product of muscle mass, neural adaptation, which is the focus of my innervation training, and practice of the desired outcome. Though there is apparent advantage of lifting with different loads on changes in muscle mass, muscle development, there's undoubtedly a neuromuscular advantage to lifting heavier loads if the primary outcome, in other words, if your goal is performing 1 repetition maximum tests, which unless you're a power lifter, that has no bearing on anything. So other than that, low reps, high loads, and only doing low reps, high loads is just training your ego and hoping you're impressing other people in the gym. But if you want real results, look at what they said here. There's no apparent advantage of lifting with different loads on changes in muscle, or there is no apparent advantage of lifting with different loads on changes in muscle mass, there is undoubtedly a neuromuscular advantage to lifting heavier loads if your goal is to just tell people how much you can bench press one time, or if you're a power lifter, etc. And then, so that is the mixture there, and that's why this reinforces everything about my hard gainer solution program. All right, that it goes through, mixing some low rep, high load stuff with various levels of surfing the curve being a very important terminology in terms of innervation training, that there are certain rep ranges that you should surf periodically in order to get the most adaptive response. So we have those as 8 to 10, 10 to 12, 12 to 15, 15 to 20, and 20 plus, depending on someone's level of work capacity. So a further purpose of the current study, now we're into the second range of the study, all right, and we're almost done, so hang in there, was to investigate the effects of novel hormonal, so the novel stuff like DHEA, and then the mainstream stuff, IGF-1, growth hormone, and testosterone, because of course these are the ones that are hyped for supplements, right? Oh, your GH booster, oh, your testosterone booster, oh, your branched chain amino acids, post-exercise circulating hormones that have been hypothesized to provide an anabolic stimulus, hypothesized. And then they quote some of the research that did that. All right, so acute bout of exercise induces a significant but transient systemic rise in a variety of hormones and metabolites. But you know what, folks? So does sleep. So again, what are we talking about here? So supplement marketers will use a statement like that, significant, and then they'll leave out the term transient, but they'll just say significant systemic rise in a variety of hormones and metabolites, and they'll use that to market supplements to you without telling you it's transient, what we call labile, which means unstable, which means not long lasting, which means it's just a stimulus response that really maybe has no direct bearing on anything to follow. So they go on to say it's been previously reported that post-exercise hormonal environment does not contribute to the resistance exercise-induced muscle proteins synthetic response or hypertrophy following resistance training. Booyah! All right, slam, slam, slam. Go to your most popular website and let them eat a little bit of crow. Ask them if they want some ketchup with this dish. Once again, the research evidence is there. People that are hawking supplements aren't going to tell you about it. So what is this particular study? This fantastic study, actually, it's one of the best control elements I've seen. So they're just saying that the post-exercise hormonal environment does not contribute to the resistance exercise-induced muscle protein synthetic response or hypertrophy, meaning muscle development. And you know, in a previous webinar, if for you hardcore people have been following me a long time, I did a whole thing on the research on the uselessness of branched chain amino acids and the research that went into that. This is saying the exact same thing. It's saying the exact same thing. So everyone who's trying to twist your arm out there, oh, you got to sip your workout drink. Oh, you got to have your whey after training. Well, you can refer to this study and say, well, you're a little more informed than that. So they also quote this study, anabolic hormones. Weston Phillips concluded anabolic hormones such as growth hormone, insulin growth factor 1, and testosterone have little to no correlation with changes in muscle development, all right, and strength as a result of 12-week resistance training intervention. All right, goes against all the supplement hype that you keep hearing, and that bears repeating. You can look at that piece of research along with this piece of research and meta-analysis that conclude that anabolic hormones such as growth hormone, IGF-1, and testosterone have little to no correlation with changes in muscle development strength as a result of the 12-week intervention. So yes, these things change in response to a stimulus and adaptive response. They have nothing to do with the actual result. So the present study adds to these results by comparing hormonal response to different high and low loads resistance training in trained people. We observe no correlations at any time and point between post-exercise testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, and changes in muscle mass and strength. So in other words, people who think you're going to supplement your way to a better body are wasting their money. Yes, if you're taking massive amounts of anabolics, these things change in the stimulus response. But if you're a natural trainee, the present study adds to previous studies comparing the hormonal environment, all right, hormonal response to high and low resistance training regimens in previous trained people, and there's no correlation at any time point between post-exercise testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, and changes in muscle mass and strength. So consider yourself better informed than 90% of the people out there who are swallowing industry dogma by blindly following industry websites. Last, the post-exercise concentrations of any of the aforementioned hormones are not even moderately relevant indicators of resistance-trained changes in muscle mass and strength in resistance-trained men. So, woo, look at that one. All right. The post-exercise concentration of any of the aforementioned hormones are not even moderately relevant indicators of resistance-trained induced changes in muscle mass and strength. So development and strength and resistance trained men, and I would submit to you this also applies to the ladies as well. So we're getting to, you're probably asking, well, if that's not what it is, then what is it? So we're going to get down to here. Now, what is it? Well, it's something that I've been saying for 30 years and in my book, The Abel Approach. So again, in my book, The Abel Approach, second edition, what is it actually that produces better physique development? We propose muscle hypertrophy is fundamentally driven by motor unit activation. All right. And I've been saying that's a fundamental, that's why I call my methodology of training innervation training, because it's all about neuromuscular effects of training. This is the main thrust of my innervation training methodology, that ranges and planes of motion to enhance motor unit recruitment and activation, all right, That's how muscle development is driven, not by lifting heavy shit. All right. So that's really, really important data. All right. So we propose, this is the researchers, that muscle hypertrophy, in other words, muscle development, is fundamentally driven by motor unit activation. How do you activate motor units more effectively? By surfing the reps curve and doing so in multiple ranges and planes of motion of muscle function. That is the argument. The current data demonstrate performing resistance training with high and low reps to volitional failure provides a similar and sufficient stimulus, though neither are necessary for hypertrophy or strength. So again, they talk about if training for 1 repetition max is your goal, then you're going to want to stay with higher loads, lower reps, but that's certainly not the way to build a better body. You're not going to build a physique like Andy's by training like a power lifter. You're just not, unless you're a genetic freak. And this industry likes to keep holding out genetic freaks as if they are the common example. Well, they're not. Okay, so one thing about Andy is he's never trained to see how much you could bench press one time. All right, it wasn't about, if you asked me at the height of my career, how much can you bench? I would always say I don't bench. And then, or I would say I have no idea because I didn't train for that. And if you asked Andy the same thing, he would probably say that as well. So, and again, all of this stuff, all right, training zones. Lifting heavier and lighter loads should not be mutually exclusive in terms of promoting resistance training adaptations, but seen as training zones that can easily be used in resistance training programs without the expectation that strength or muscle gains are going to be significantly compromised. All right, that's really, really important stuff. And again, that goes directly to my program, the Hard Gainer Solution, which I'm proud of because they're actually drawing conclusions for me. So that actually speaks to the intelligent design behind my Hard Gainer Solution program. And of course, it's an online course now. And they say, we acknowledge training paradigms should be tailored to the individual's goals and preferences. Well, I don't know anyone who doesn't care if they see any results from working out. I mean, I think there's a little bit of healthy vanity in everyone who works out that they would like to see something cosmetically for their efforts. So in conclusion, all right, we're going to go through all the conclusions now. High and low repetition, low and high load respectively training paradigms elicit comparable stimulus for the accretion of I'm going to get to your comments, folks, of skeletal muscle mass when resistance exercises are performed until volitional failure. So again, intensity is more important than load. That's another reason I wrote the Hard Gainer Solution in complexes, because by doing exercises back to back, you're forced to train at a higher intensity and your body will adopt to that with a greater work capacity. So the current findings taken together with previous reports, and they show you some references there, these effects are not contributed upon training status or study design. In other words, these are sound principles. These are operating of the principles. So very, very important. And Andy's just saying, I'm going to get to the comments, but Andy's just saying how often people have asked him over the years, why they never see him train, quote unquote, heavy. Because he's not in there to impress other people with how much he can lift. He's impressed there to get a result, and a result that you can't do by measuring. And I better walk over to my training journal now. Oh, I did this many reps with this much weight. No, you should be feeling your workout, not measuring it. So, increases in lean body mass as an indirect measure of muscle mass and muscle fiber cross-sectional area. Direct measure of muscle area occurred in both low reps and high reps groups, with no difference between the groups because the groups shared high intensity as the common denominator, what I call maximal voluntary neural activation, which is a neuromuscular effect of training if you're training hard. So it's not about training heavy, it's about training hard. In agreement with previous studies, it's clear that post-exercise increases in systemic hormone concentrations are unrelated to changes in muscle hypertrophy and strength. I'm going to really boot that up for you here. All right. And I'm going to hype this word right here, unrelated. So share this to your platehead friends, who want to tell you all about their new magic potion that they eat just before the workout and just after their workout, blah, 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 blah. In agreement with previous studies, it's clear that the post-exercise increases in systemic hormone concentrations unrelated to changes in muscle hypertrophy and strength, and therefore negates promotion, this is my comment, of useless testosterone boosters, GH boosters, branched chain amino acids, pre and post-workout nutrient timing, overemphasized, etc., etc. This is what the real research has to say about developing a physique, developing a figure, folks. And this reinforces all the arguments of my own innovation training methodology, again, that I've been pointing out over and over again in my book, The Abel Approach, second edition. You see it behind me there, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. Now, the references. Let me scroll through here, and then I'll come back. As you can see, they themselves, you have 53 different references here in the Journal of Applied Physiology, which means this is quite the academic finding. Very, very important stuff. And then I'm going to point out a few of you, for a few that you should actually look for yourself. Henneman, the size principle, anything that E. Henneman has written about the size principle, you should check out. There's more than just the one that they used here, but that's worth understanding as well. So very, very important as well. And then, of course, these ones are all in my book as well, I believe, The Abel Approach. So it's nice when other academics are quoting the same research as I am. Schoenfeld, effects of low versus high load resistance training on muscle strength and hypertrophy in well-trained men. Schoenfeld again, and I even meant to highlight this Schwanke piece of research, but it was disproven in terms of studies like this. So you can see 53 studies. Now they quote studies that they actually debunked as well, because they have to include the research. So that becomes really, really important as well. So really, really important stuff. And if you look behind me here, folks, I'm sure you can see the Abel Approach second edition. And then, of course, I will hold up for you the hard gainer solution. All right, very, very important. This is also a course now because you guys demanded it. So I'm going to now take your comments. And like I said, Andy, who just wrote me yesterday, actually, he's actually getting stronger on the hard gainer solution without really focusing on that, because it's got the 5 sets of 5, surfing the curve, et cetera, et cetera. He wrote me yesterday to tell me about how much stronger he was getting doing the hard gainer solution again. And that's in the research I just read you. It's what I call strength density. And then you can see that by training, surfing the repetition curve, you're going to get just as strong as if you used heavier weights. And then, yeah, okay, I'm going to get to other. Doug's just saying, well, thanks, Doug. I try to give you, the good studies. I'm not going to present bad studies and tell you why they're bad. The supplement industry does that all on its own. So I did all 80 workouts in the hard gainer solution about 6 months. I can give my recommendation. You should check out the course when it becomes available again too, Yanni. The course is really in depth as well. And then Perry's just posting a link to all my various products and stuff. Yanni is also saying, I'd like to understand how this volitional failure correlates with hard gainers, because in the hard gainers, you should never train to failure. Because in this study, Yanni, they have to have a constant in terms of in having reliable conclusions they can format. So because the hard gainer solution is trying to build work capacity, intensity of effort is going to build into that without necessarily training to failure. But because it's written into the program in complexes, like I always say, within the rep schemes that are called for, you choose a weight that challenges you for the reps indicated, and that's the determining factor. That's always going to raise your work capacity without training to volitional failure, but training hard nonetheless. And so for the purposes of the study, they needed something more tangible to know that the study was true. But in real life on the gym floor, training just short of failure still gives you the optimum intensity level. I talk in the Abel Approach about 100% versus 80% intensity, and that your body doesn't really know the difference between the two. It's just that it's harder to recover from the 100% than it is from the 80%. So hopefully that clears that up for you. Okay, so Perry's just posting that, and then let me see if we can get the so again, if you're just going to move around heavy weight, then you're going to pay a price for that down the road in terms of joint strain, joint stress, osteo issues, things like that. So Yanni's just saying, surprised how few people tune in every week to watch Scott's webinars. I appreciate that. I try to give some academic combined with experience. I don't want to be all one way or all the other way. Like I said, there's too many online wannabe experts who hide behind science. They think everything is about research. And I've never seen a good coach on the sideline of an NFL football game who wears a lab coat. So, one of the things I say in my book, repeating the chemical constituents of chocolate is never going to lead to an understanding of how it tastes. And what I'm saying there is it's easy to sound smart and quote a bunch of academic crap, but the real people with the real knowledge do it in the trenches. So very, very important as well. So hopefully everybody's got all they wanted to get out of that. Hopefully you've been hitting the share button too, and we'll, talk about. So what it really takes, all right, get back to the beginning. Let me just post the study once again. Journal of Applied Physiology, 2016, July. Take a look at it if you want. But what it really takes to develop a physique or figure is not how much weight you lift, all right, but it's a certain level of intensity of training, surfing the reps curve, and multiple planes and ranges of motion in order for motor unit activation. So very, very, very important stuff. There's some comments I'm not going to include here because they're just silly, saying that what I talk about here is too simplistic. I don't think it's simplistic at all. So, talking about what's real and what isn't, a lot of the times, just like I posted last night, Occam's razor, folks, the scientific precept of Occam's razor, people in this industry don't get because they think all this is rocket science. When you reduce it to what Einstein said, is that the truth is simple and simplicity is the truth. And that's what I'm trying to bring it to you. So Tony's just saying, when doing the 5x5 in the hard gainer solution, does it matter? Stay at a constant weight, or is it okay to increase each set? What I would say, Tony, is stay at the constant weight for the 5x5. Now, in the other rep ranges, 8 to 12, 12 to 15, 15 to 20, you can definitely surf within those sets. You can do, for instance, the 15 to 20. You could do one set at 15, drop the weight and do one set at 18 or 20, or you could start at 20, do the next set at 18, the next set at 15, et cetera, et cetera. But for the 5x5, I would do sets across or weights constant. Very, very important stuff. Good question. Really, really, really good question. So, and then Danny's just saying, great stuff. Thank you for taking the time to share this information. Well, I hope it helps, Danny. I hope all you people out there, by all means, when I'm sharing this stuff, please hit your share buttons and some emoticons. I can't see them, but it certainly helps other people take notice of what's important and what isn't. So good, important stuff. So again, here's the study. The Journal of Applied Physiology, and the reason it's a great study includes meta-analysis, includes research, previous research, in-depth research, and I will tell you that my book, second edition, The Abel Approach, which I guess is too simple for some people who are on here, but I have over 150 references, I do believe, in this book. Very, very important stuff. So that's my Abel Approach, second edition, which you can get. Really, really important books and courses. Like I said, the Abel Approach actually turned into my course, Program Design Masterclass, which you can get. Maybe Perry, you can sign up for. We only release it a few times, but maybe Perry can post the link as well. And then the other book, The Hard Gainer Solution, of course, is a book and a course as well. So between the two, you've got a book and courses that you can follow up on. So really, really important as well. And then Andy's just saying, of course, simple is what's sustainable. And a lot of people don't get that. And I also want to speak to ladies, and I'll come back to this in a future episode, but ladies who are afraid, that training for development, because it's not metabolic, is somehow, oh no, I'm not training as hard now. You're just training different. You're not training, you're training to optimize biochemical and hormonal aspects that will affect your physique down the road. You can't just train metabolically all the time and think that working out is just about burning calories. If you do that, and ladies are especially prone to that, then you're missing the point and you're not seeing the forest for the trees. So I'll come back to that one, of course, but that's very, very important as well. So one more time, there's the study, folks. I've been on more than an hour, so I'm going to pop this, and hopefully you benefited. The comment and the title, what research really says on how to train for muscle development and what's truly involved in that. And it's not, hormonal concentrations post-workout, and it's not how much you lift. So really, really important stuff. Hopefully you got it. And then just one more comment here from Tony, because it's a good one. Tony's just saying, tired and worn out from going heavy, was actually getting fatter, started the Hard Gainer Solution in the last 6 weeks and love it. Oh, glad to hear it, Tony. Renewed energy to my workouts, feel great afterwards, feel pumped, and have gained strength and muscle. Love it. Thanks, Coach. Well, geez, hopefully you left us a review, Tony, on Amazon or whatever, because that's quite the testimonial for the Hard Gainer. Not that I haven't heard it before, but really, really important stuff. So, what's Brian saying? Yeah, Brian's just asking, the common denominator here, Brian, about your comment is what you're just saying, honest effort with the majority of our workouts, which is what underlined this whole study, and that is intensity, right? Volitional. They train to volitional failure. You don't have to do that. And when I'm advocating is about enticing maximum voluntary neural activation, and you do that with a certain level of intensity, close to failure, but doesn't have to be failure. So that's really, really important stuff as well. So good point. And with that, folks, that's how you really train for figure or muscle development. It's not about how you lift. It's about surfing the rep curve in multiple planes and ranges of motion. And research has finally caught up to me, as it has on many other topics I've written about, like sodium and a gazillion others. So hopefully that helped you. Hopefully and appreciate that this is the place to be for real deal information, because I have no supplements to sell you. So I'm trying to sell you on the Einstein principles of methodology. So with that being said, folks, hopefully I'll see you all next week. Hit the share button, get this out there, and I'll see you in the next live broadcast.